embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the day's big issues that we need to look at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Tom Slater, editor of the news and current affairs online magazine Spiked. And here's what we've got coming up on the show. Backlog Britain continues to grind to a halt as more flights are set to be grounded at Gatwick. And what really went on during the Capitol Hill riots? Did Trump try to cause a violent insurrection? The Congress-led 6th of July hearings yesterday brought some pretty explosive claims. We cross live to the States for more. And why are we popping so many pills? With 1 in 5 hospital admissions amongst the elderly being down to the side effects of drugs, England's top doc says enough is enough. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet the programme at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. London Gatwick is cutting the number of daily flights this summer to help tackle issues with staffing. The airport will limit its number to 825 flights a day in July and 850 in August. That's down from 900 in previous years. Gatwick said the decision was taken to help passengers experience a more reliable and better standard of service. Meanwhile, Gatwick Airport says staff shortages played no role in the death of a disabled passenger as they were leaving a plane. It says the incident occurred while airport staff were helping disembark 3 passengers with restricted mobility. EasyJet confirmed the death in a statement yesterday. The man reportedly fell down an escalator after getting off the plane without a helper. A formal investigation is underway. Hundreds of railway workers at Southeastern will vote on whether to strike as disputes over pay and jobs continue. The ballot opens next week and closes on the 11th of July, which could see strikes start from as early as July the 25th. That as half of rail lines close on Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday of next week because of an RMT union strike. The union's also staging a 24-hour walkout with Unite on the London Underground on Tuesday of next week. Julian Assange's wife says her husband will be driven to suicide if he's extradited to the US, where he's facing charges of espionage. The WikiLeaks founder has 14 days to appeal the Home Secretary's decision. The Home Office said the UK courts have found extradition is compatible with his human rights, including his right to a fair trial. He's wanted by the American authorities over documents leaked in 2010 and 2011. Stella Assange says they'll fight to return Julian to his family.
This was always a possibility that Priti Patel would approve sending Julian to the country that has plotted to assassinate him. We're not at the end of the road here. We're going to fight this. We're going to use every appeal avenue. And we're going to fight. I'm going to spend every waking hour fighting for Julian until he's free, until justice is served.
4 members of a criminal gang which targeted victims as young as 14 in North London have been convicted of a string of knife-point robberies. The teenage gang, with the youngest aged 17, were convicted of 19 separate offences. The court heard that they carried out a series of robberies at knife point across Camden and Islington between January and March of last year. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine being granted candidate status for EU membership would help the country defeat Russia. Wearing the colours of the Ukrainian flag, the president of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said the proposal was on the understanding Ukraine carries out a number of reforms.
Yes, Ukraine deserves European perspective. Yes, Ukraine should be welcomed as a candidate country. This is on the understanding that good work has been done, but important work also remains to be done. The entire process is merits-based. So it goes by the book, and therefore progress depends entirely on Ukraine. It is Ukraine that has it in their hands, and what could be better to shape your own future?
Well, Downing Street has welcomed the possibility of the UK hosting the 2023 Eurovision Song Contest if this year's winner, Ukraine, can't. A Number 10 spokesman's pledged to ensure it would overwhelmingly reflect Ukraine's rich culture, heritage and creativity. The European Broadcasting Union's decided next year's Eurovision won't be held in the war-torn country. Instead, the BBC's in talks to host it in the UK, this year's runner-up. And parts of the UK today could reach up to 34 degrees as the Met Office issues a level 3 heat health alert for London, the east of England and the southeast. Level 3 alerts are issued to help healthcare services prepare for possible increases in demand due to the heat. Meteorologist John Hammond told us climate change has made it hard to predict the weather.
If you think back to last week, meteorologists, myself included, had no idea this heat was going to arrive. So with global warming, with climate change, that heat tends to spring up at quite short notice. So it's something we'll be keeping an eye on over the next week or two. But at the moment, there are no indications of a return of those really high temperatures in the next week or two.
Well, wherever you are, try and stay cool. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alex with We Need to Talk About.
Backlog Britain. It's beyond a joke. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet looking at basic services and infrastructure, we've become the national equivalent of the Ever Given, gridlocked like an unwelcome deposit in a U-bend. Railways closed with the biggest strikes in decades, airports grounding flights because there's nobody to run the actual airports. And if you dare test out the crumbling road network with its so-called smart motorways and obsession with emission zones, you might just arrive at your destination 50 miles away sometime next week. Because we've become useless, feckless and lazy, focusing on all the wrong priorities and failing to get the basics right. An utter farce of a developed world country with barely any phone signal, constantly on the verge of grinding to a halt. Why doesn't anyone ever sort anything out? We live in a culture of buck passing, and it's driving us all mad? Well, buck up, Britain. Let's go live to GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins, who's live at Gatwick Airport. Paul, announcements that lots of flights will be grounded this summer at the nation's second biggest airport. What's the latest?
Yeah, the latest is the airport's effectively taking control of the situation from the airlines that fly from here. I've had a thorough briefing from the airport as to what their plans are for July and August. And effectively, they're stressing that the problem that has arisen is the fact that there aren't enough ground handling staff, right? The airlines haven't employed enough ground handling staff. So the airport did some research and said to the airlines, you need to reduce your flight numbers for July and August at the busiest periods so that the amount of staff you have matches the number of flights that are travelling. And we won't have the scenes that we had during the Jubilee weekend. Now, the number of flights that they've asked them to reduce them by, it's only 5%. 5% of the flights that go from here in July and August will be affected. And even if you are affected, and you'll find out in an email that will drop into your inbox in the next few days, you will be asked to fly at a slightly different time on the same airline. So instead of 7 o'clock on a Friday night, it'll be 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And the alternative could be that maybe you fly with a different airline on the same route at a slightly different time. A very small number of that 5% may have to significantly change their plans, but the vast majority of people will travel more or less on time from this airport as scheduled. The point is that the airport and the airlines are giving 6 weeks notice of this. So we don't get the chaos. We're not talking about chaos. We're not talking about turning up at the airport at the last minute. This is 6 weeks notice that if your flight is cancelled, then you will be able to make plans, you will be able to make adjustments, and it probably won't affect your holiday too much. So the airport really stressing that. There has been some misreporting in the media talking about chaos and things like that, and they do admit that in the past, over the Jubilee weekend, there were some mistakes, but they're determined to make sure that doesn't happen now. In fact, the Department for Transport and the Civil Aviation Authority have written to airlines saying you need to de-risk the summer schedule for passengers, and so they've said to airlines you need to reschedule according to the amount of staff you have. Here at Gatwick, they're getting ahead of the curve. When it comes to security, which they are in charge of, they've hired an extra 400 people. The target's 450. Those 400 people start in the next couple of weeks. And then if you're not flying from Gatwick and you're flying from elsewhere in the UK, probably you can expect some flight cancellations there. We've seen cancellations from TUI in Manchester, from British Airways at Heathrow already. So the airlines will make adjustments to their schedule and make cancellations accordingly. But they do seem to be hopefully getting ahead of the curve now. And it's about making sure passengers don't turn up to the airport disappointed. You know what it's like, Alex. You get to the airport, you're excited, you're going on holiday, only to find the flight's cancelled. And so closing that gap between disappointment and excitement is what the airlines and the airports are trying to do.
Paul, thank you ever so much. Paul Hawkins there, our national reporter. Well, joining me now on the show is travel journalist Simon Calder. Simon, Paul there is sort of suggesting it might not be as much of a farce as the scenes we saw over Jubilee weekend. Can we hope for potentially less disruption to travel over summer? Or is this announcement by Gatwick a bit of a harbinger of doom, especially for people who can only really go on holiday during school summer holidays?
No, the only people who it's going to be doom-laden for, I predict, are those people like me who've been hanging on for a last-minute bargain because we're now feeling a little bit sheepish because the number of available flights will shrink very, very quickly, and the prices of those that are left will go through the roof. So, no, Paul absolutely summed it up really well then. This is a preemptive move to avoid the sort of chaos we actually saw last night. So, for example, EasyJet cancelled well over 50 flights yesterday to and from Gatwick, a ridiculous number, of which some were very, very late notice, including a round trip to Lisbon, where people suddenly were told you're not travelling. Now, that was due to air traffic control problems, which are always going to come up. I mean, Paul was saying you're not going to see chaos this summer. Well, I can absolutely and exclusively guarantee you are going to see some chaos, because we always do, but hopefully it will be at a much smaller level than the wholesale cancellations that we're seeing at the moment. And yes, if you're flying on British Airways, for example, they are already quite quietly cancelling a huge number of their flights. They're cancelling 120 short-haul European and domestic flights a day in and out of London Heathrow, 10% of the schedule. And they're doing that in order to make sure that they can run the rest. That's going to be the pattern, I think, elsewhere. If you look at the other big airports, well, Manchester and Stansted. Manchester had a horrible time at the start of the half term, much better now. Stansted hasn't really had any problems. The only cancellations I ever see in and out of there are EasyJet flights from other parts of the UK that aren't operating. However, we've always got, of course, the strikes coming down the road. Ryanair has got some cabin crew in Spain, in Italy and Portugal threatening to strike. That may cause some disruption. The French air traffic controllers have barely flexed their industrial action muscles this year. So there will be some difficult scenes, but this is really about managing it down. Gatwick collapsed more than any other big airport, and it's rebounded faster than any other, and that's why you've got these very, very overstretched parts of the operation, in particular EasyJet and its ground handling side.
I mean, people have suggested that one of the reasons we've got a lot of these issues with travel is because travel that was obviously cancelled during the pandemic and credits being issued is now being booked. Now we're sort of seemingly out to the other side, but it's created this sort of knock-on domino effect. Is there a risk that the same thing with cancelled flights now this summer could make this, well, not crisis, but this disruption continue late on into the year? When do you think we'll be out the other side?
Oh, look. OK, so Scottish schools go on holiday next week. They're going to be, lucky them, the prototypes for what the summer's going to look like. Actually, the Scottish airports, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Prestwick, Aberdeen, Inverness, they've all been doing pretty well. So I'm not too worried about that. Yeah, you're going to see more strains and stresses over the summer. But with moves like this, which is actually simply doing what the Department for Transport and the Civil Aviation Authority ordered airlines and airports to do earlier on this week, it's just going to make the operation probably kind of, well, 15% smaller than it was in 2019 and about 5% smaller than the airlines would like it to be in their ideal world in which they live, but nobody else does. So I would say it's a good news story, and I would absolutely agree with Paul that headlines about travel chaos and misery and all that stuff are wide of the mark. Yes, you should be looking forward to your holiday with renewed anticipation.
But if you still haven't booked your summer holiday, get on and do it quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can quite happily book in and out of Gatwick. The worst that will happen is your flight will be cancelled and you'll be moved to another departure, same day, same destination.
Simon Calder, thank you ever so much. Always delightful speaking to you. Well, my studio guest throughout the show today is Tom Slater, editor of the news and current affairs online magazine Spiked. I mean, we are having headlines constantly, aren't we, of everything grinding to a halt, rail strikes, traffic jams, flights being grounded. And I do get the impression that we are increasingly living in a country where we just don't seem as efficient as we used to be. What's going on?
It's a strange one, isn't it? All kinds of things in relation to like travel infrastructure just feel like they're crumbling at the moment. I mean, I always think about how it's taken us more than 50 years to try and fail to build another runway. I mean, it's just something which always gets kind of gunged up in the process. And there's just that kind of lack of that ambition to try and think not only just how can we maintain what we've got, but how can we make it better? If anything, as you were alluding to earlier, we're going in the other direction. We're making it more difficult for people to drive. You know, we're putting all these kinds of restrictions in for environmental reasons, all these kinds of other matters. But whether it's people going about their daily business or going on holiday, these things really matter. Being able to get around the country and internationally is a really important thing. But for whatever reason, we're paralysed from putting proper infrastructure in place to make that happen.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder whatever happened to HS2. Haven't heard of that for a while. Something else that's probably disappeared down the drain pipe. Tom, thank you ever so much. Oh, Britain. The minute the sun comes out, it's like the dawn of the first ever day. We crawl out of our caves like early man, pointing at the big ball of fire in the sky in wonderment and awe, not knowing whether it's a sign from God or a harbinger of apocalyptic doom, and proceed to take off most of our clothes, turn our lives upside down and act like it's our last day on Earth. So eager are we to sacrifice our days at the altar of the sun god. Loads of you are skiving off work to rotate like a chicken on a spit in your gardens. Google Trends data shows searches for mouse jigglers, naughty little devices that move a cursor to make a remote worker appear like they're active when they're actually away from the computer, soared 5 times higher on hot days. And you wonder why it seems to take 4 times longer to get anything done. Well, let's see how many people still want to work from home over winter when Putin power costs £1 million per megawatt hour. Not that I'm jealous or anything. I did ask the boss if I could present the show from my sun lounger, but he didn't seem too keen. Well, I'm delighted to now be joined by meteorologist and weather forecaster at the Met Office, Alex Deakin. Alex, it's quite early for a heat wave, isn't it? What's going on?
Yeah, we've seen the temperatures rising throughout the week, and particularly today. Today is the hottest day of the year so far, actually hotter than any temperature recorded last year. So we've already beaten last year's record. It is pretty early. It's unusual to get these kind of temperatures in June. If we get 34 today, which we may get close to, it'll be the 3rd time in the last 6 years that we've hit 34 Celsius in June. But we've only recorded it 5 times in history, going back 140 years. So it is becoming more frequent, but it is very unusual to see these kind of temperatures in June. Big fat area of high pressure. It's been moving in through this week, and it's now just edging away to the east, and that's allowing more southerly winds to come in. So we're getting hotter air up from France and up from Spain. We're not going to see those kind of temperatures that they saw, but we are importing some of their hot air. Plus the day-on-day heat has been building and building, leading to these temperatures today.
You know, they say a watched kettle never boils. I feel like a watched weather app never changes. And I've been avidly checking all the weather apps I have on my phone for some good news about the weekend. But it seems like there is change afoot happening on Saturday, if not Sunday, for many parts of the country.
Well, many parts of the country are not seeing any heat today, actually. Scotland, Northern Ireland, it is raining. Earlier on today, it was 30.7 at Heathrow, where it was only 13.7 at Glasgow. So we've seen big contrasts today. It has been raining across Scotland, Northern Ireland. That rain is easing, and actually a much better weekend for Scotland and Northern Ireland without the heat. It's just going to be dry and bright with some sunshine and a bit of a breeze. But yes, the weather further south is changing. I mean, if you check your apps all the time, they are going to be changing. That's what apps do. You want to be speaking to a human. That makes the difference, Alex. But yeah, we are in for some showers through the course of the weekend. Actually, in the southeast, one more, probably pretty decent day tomorrow. If you like it hot, we're going to get close to 30 Celsius in the far southeast. But for the Midlands, Wales, much of northern England, temperature will be 15, 16 degrees lower tomorrow compared to today. So we are seeing that change, and we're all back in the change next week. Temperatures much closer to average, but still actually some pretty pleasant sunny weather, just temperatures back closer to average with some sunny spells.
Alex Deakin, thank you so much. Do you know what? I'm going to have to get you on speed dial because planning my weekends would be so much easier if I had you on the other end of a phone.
Always here for you, Alex.
Thank you. Well, joining me now on GB News is London reporter Alice Porter. Alice, I understand it's pretty hot out there. I'm in air-conditioned studio, so I have no idea. What's it like?
Hi there, Alex. I'm going to have to say it is a beautiful afternoon here on Hampstead Heath, and it really is roasting. I've just had a chat with the park rangers, and I said, do you know how hot it is here? And they've informed me it's 28 degrees Celsius, but that is not the hottest temperature that's been recorded today so far. Heathrow has the highest recorded temperature of 30.3 Celsius, which is absolutely extraordinary. We're expecting it, as you were just hearing from your previous guest there, for it to rise to 34 degrees Celsius. And if it does, it's most likely that the Met Office will declare it a heat wave, because you have to have at least 3 consecutive days in a row where it exceeds temperatures. And for those of you who are watching, can see from the people behind me, there are so many people who are just enjoying the good weather, having an ice cream, a lot of people splashing about in the ponds and just enjoying the sunshine. But of course, many people find this kind of weather very, very difficult, particularly those who suffer with hay fever. We've got very high pollen levels as well, but hopefully by this weekend things should start to go back to a little bit more like normality.
There you go. That's half of Whitehall behind you there working from home, Alice. Now, earlier on, I saw a clip of you losing your hat, being blown into the Hampstead ponds. Did you manage to retrieve it?
I retrieved. I have to say, it's here. It is here. It survives. It was a very friendly man on a paddleboard who heroically came and sort of speared it and gave it back to me. So it's all online. If anyone's been watching the saga, go on, have a look on the GB News Twitter page, and you can see the full story there.
Pop it on, you'll get sunstroke, love. Take care of yourself. Alice Porter, our London reporter, enjoying the weather like many Londoners who clearly don't have to work today. I want to know your views. Are you basking in the sun, watching us on the GB News app, or indeed listening to us on DAB radio? Or are you wishing for a washout? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBNews. You're with, guess what, GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, there were some explosive claims at the US Capitol riot hearings yesterday. We'll cross the pond to find out more. Time for a short break now.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Some pretty wild allegations have been flung about in the July the 6th hearings in America about the day that rioters stormed Capitol Hill in protest at the presidential election results. You remember that. The Congress committee investigation into what happened on that fateful day has been held up as a Democrat-led witch hunt by backers of Trump, as he is accused of inciting insurrection by claiming the elections had been stolen and stoking up the violent scenes that then ensued. One after another, Trump's officials have claimed they told him there was no evidence of fraud, also with multiple accounts of a drunk Rudy Giuliani trying to convince him otherwise. Well, yesterday, the committee pointed to emails between John Eastman, the lawyer who allegedly crafted the strategy to overturn the election, to Rudy Giuliani, asking to be on the pardoned list, knowing that the plan to interrupt Biden's certification by getting Mike Pence to hand the election to Trump would violate the Electoral Count Act, something Pence then refused to do, leading to the chance of hang Mike Pence, which saw the vice president evacuated and sent into hiding with his family. Box office stuff worthy of a Hollywood film, but what really went down that day? I'm delighted to be joined by former Deputy Assistant to President Trump, Sebastian Gorka. Now, Sebastian, it's not my country. I don't claim to know what happened, and I don't want to cast judgments. But can you shine a light on these committee hearings and you know, what you think went on July the 6th?
Well, absolutely. I'd be delighted to, Alex. I was there in the front row outside the White House for the event where the president spoke at. And the interesting thing is that this witch hunt, this inquisition, this Star Chamber, they played lots of video in the last couple of weeks, but the one clip they refused to play is my old boss standing at the podium saying, "We will now march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol." That clip seems to have gotten lost amongst all of the hundreds of hours of interviews. So this is a farce. This is a charade. Why? Because this is an election year. This is a midterm election in November, and the Democrats are faring disastrously in the polls. It's not a surprise. 2 million illegals led across the border, the disastrous surrender in Afghanistan, the invasion of Ukraine. We have the highest inflation now, thanks to Biden, in 41 years, and the highest petrol prices that America has ever seen. So this is all a kind of, don't look over there, look over here, shiny distraction. And on top of that, it's a farce. An investigatory committee of Congress, by law, has to have nominees from both parties on the committee. Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat Speaker of the House, refused to accept the Republican nominees. So basically, this is an illegitimate committee that is meant to distract you from the disaster that is the Biden White House.
I mean, who are these ex-Trump officials who are queuing up to sort of drive the knife in, essentially, and saying, oh, well, I did tell him he was overreacting. I did tell him there wasn't electoral fraud. Why are they doing it? And was there electoral fraud? Because that really is at the centre of all of this.
Wow, great question. You guys actually do real journalism, so God bless you. If you want to know the facts, there's a movie. I'm one of the people interviewed in it called 2,000 Mules. It's streaming right now. We had in the first 6 days, 1 million downloads, 100,000 DVDs mailed out. If you go to salemnow.com, that's S-A-L-E-M, salemnow.com, download 2,000 Mules, you will see the data that an amazing organization called True the Vote captured in the battleground states where the vote for the president magically flipped on the night of the election. And we have data of more than 400,000 illegal ballots that were harvested in states where you're not allowed to collect somebody else's vote ballots. We have the geolocating data of the people who harvested them. We have the CCTV camera footage of people stuffing ballots illegally into drop boxes. So I'll let the viewers decide for themselves, watch the movie. With regards to your first question, there's a lot of slime balls in the swamp. There's a lot of people who want to make money and then suddenly turn around and say, if I dish the dirt, maybe I'll get a TV contract, maybe I'll get a book contract. I don't do that. The January 6th committee subpoenaed my phone records and the phone records of my wife and my children. But that is the real story here, the political persecution of people who support making America great again, which is the president's mantra, because he can run again next year. And he's going to run and he's going to win. So this is how they're going to try and stop him.
Sebastian Gorka, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and quite last minute as well, to come on this programme and talk to me about this topic. I really do appreciate it. Well, let's talk to my studio guest, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked. Tom, I mean, I go, well, it's not my country and I shouldn't really care, but I do find myself going one way and the other on this, because I've got a lot of friends in the Republican Party who really do maintain that there was dodgy business going on in those elections. But then when you read American media and listen to those hearings, you think, oh, blimey, that sounds really, hyperventilated and blown up. And Trump did seem to be, well, at least turning the other cheek when people started marching and things got a little bit hairy. It took him a long time to tell people to calm down.
It did. I think the difficulty is, because of this kind of Trump derangement syndrome, is that it becomes increasingly difficult to actually criticise Trump for the bad things that he has done, because the tendency is just to blow it all out of proportion. For instance, in relation to the Capitol riot, it was a very bad thing. It was a very bad day for American democracy. You had a large group of people there who fundamentally didn't believe the election was fair, incorrectly, in my view. And yet it's not enough to say that's bad, that's condemnable, let's punish them. It was an insurrection, it was a coup. Trump was orchestrating this. This was an attempt to overthrow the American Republic. It just suddenly gets so out of bounds to the point where you can't criticise him for what he did do wrong, which was to spread this misinformation essentially about, the election being stolen from him, which I think there's individual allegations. Nothing has convinced me so far that what he's suggested is the truth. And since then is failing to condemn what happened in the aftermath. That should be enough to talk about, but of course it isn't, because the narrative always has to be that he's the most evil man who's ever lived.
Yeah.
He's many things, but he's not that.
Wounds that are not going to heal for a long time, I'd imagine, especially if we do see a reappearance of Donald Trump into elections in America. Tom, thank you ever so much. What are your thoughts on this? GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'm fascinated to hear opinions on this one. So like I said, I don't know, not my country. Why would I purport to have any evidence one way or the other? You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, the European Commission has backed giving Ukraine candidate status to join the EU. We'll be talking about that one in depth. Is it really good news? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thank you, Alex. It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. London Gatwick is cutting the number of daily flights this summer to help tackle issues with staffing. The airport will limit its number to 825 flights a day in July and 850 in August. That's down from 900 in previous years. Stella Assange says they'll use every avenue to appeal the Home Secretary's decision to extradite her husband Julian Assange to the US. The WikiLeaks founders wanted by the American authorities over documents leaked in 2010 and 2011. He faces charges of espionage and has 14 days to appeal the decision. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine being granted candidate status for EU membership would help the country defeat Russia. Wearing the colours of the Ukrainian flag, the president of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said the proposal was on the understanding Ukraine carries out a number of reforms.
It's been stabbed by who?
By me.
By you?
Yes.
A former soldier has been convicted of murder for stabbing his neighbours to death in a row over parking. Colin Reeves has been convicted of killing Stephen and Jennifer Chappell in their home in Somerset last November while their children were asleep upstairs. A double-decker bus has caught fire on a street in South London. The London Fire Brigade said the driver and passengers had got off the bus before firefighters arrived. No injuries have been reported and the cause of the blaze is unknown. And speaking of blazes, temperatures have reached 30.7 degrees Celsius at Heathrow and could climb further still to 34 degrees Celsius in parts of the southeast. The Met Office has issued a level 3 heat health alert for London, the east of England and the southeast. They're issued to help healthcare services prepare for possible increases in demand due to rising temperatures. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. It's back to We Need to Talk About with Alex in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, it's been in the pipeline for a while, causing a violent uprising in 2014 that resulted in over 100 deaths when protests were sparked by Ukraine government's decision not to sign the EU association agreement, instead choosing ties with Russia, despite the parliament having overwhelmingly voting otherwise. Calls for the resignation of Viktor Yanukovych came amidst claims of corruption and human rights violations. Well, today, under the dark clouds of a brutal war and a new president elected on the mandate of moving westwards, Ukraine has now been invited to join the EU, subject to approval by the other member states next week. But membership comes with conditions, many of which will surely have to be dropped if accession is to be fast-tracked, like the debt-to-GDP ratios that no war-torn nation could meet, and demands over social policy and corruption that Ukraine has been a long way off achieving, however much we may have fallen in love with the plucky country today. Meanwhile, Macron warned just last month membership would take decades, while other countries could well be wary of having a very hungry mouth to feed when they're also in dire economic straits. Plus, what will Putin do in reaction? Well, joining me on the show now is former advisor to the Ministry of Defence, NATO and the UN, Gwydion Prince, and still with me in the studio is editor of Spikes, Tom Slater. Gwydion, Ursula von der Leyen there, dressed in Ukraine colours, a bit like I am, by accident, saying, yes, come join the EU. Is this a bit knee-jerk and, opportunistic? Is this going to provoke a lot of upset? Can it happen quickly? Is it a good idea? A lot to answer there.
All right, take it in reverse order. If I was the Ukrainians, no, it isn't a good idea. Can it happen quickly? No, it can't happen quickly. Look, the EU, as I think everybody knows now, is a sort of an octopus. It has lots of tentacles. And when you deal with it, you should always watch out to see what tentacle it is that's going to come out and grab you around the neck. What's going to happen about currency union? Are they going to impose the euro on the Ukrainians? A country that's just fought in blood to recover its own self-identity, to create its own self-identity in blood, in fact. And also, I mean, there is something distasteful, I have to say, about the sight of President Macron and the German Chancellor, whose countries have both been involved in arms trading with the Russians since the time of the illegal occupation of Crimea, now standing up on their back legs. Not only that, in the case of Mr. Macron, doing a great big bear hug, we discover that Mr. Zelensky is even shorter than Mr. Macron. Mr. Macron is shorter than I am. I mean, listen to the words, yeah, but look at what they do. What we see happening is a Germany which, under 3 chancellorships, has become structurally addicted to, and deliberately so, to Russian gas and oil. Very, very hard to break out of those relationships. And Ukraine, I mean, you spoke of hungry mouths. Remember, it's really the other way around. This has been, since the time of Catherine the Great, the grain basket of Europe. And what we're now faced with is Putin having had more reverses on the battlefield, launching the Holodomor, which is a word from Stalin's time, 1932 to 33, deliberately weaponizing hunger against particularly the poorest people in the world. This is a grim and horrible war. And frankly, joining the EU, well, if I was Mr. Putin, I would talk to Mr. Johnson about joining the Commonwealth. I think it's a much more straightforward relationship.
And do you think that Putin's going to react to this? Because some might say that actually it was that ever closer drift towards the EU, towards the Western European nations that might have provoked Putin into going into Russia in the first place. I mean, he's going to know full well that this offer has been extended. Is he going to react, do you think?
Well, he might like to. I'm not quite sure what he can do. I mean, if we turn to the military tactical situation that you and I have talked about over weeks now, it's very important for viewers to realize that whilst they are seeing certain Russian advances on the Donbass and they're seeing horrible casualties among Ukrainians, that largely is our fault because we talked the talk, but we didn't yet sufficiently quickly walk the walk in providing them with the weapons to defend themselves and to go on the offensive. Because what we have to decide, and I think in this country we have decided, is whether we want the Ukrainians to win, to put the Russian Federation forces into a position of sufficient weakness that when the negotiation at the end of the fighting comes, they will negotiate from a position of strength. Mr. Macron does not want that. He's made that abundantly clear. He wants to insert himself, and of course there is a long, as I'm sure you know, a long, long history of Franco-Russian relations going back to the defeat of the French by the Prussians in 1871. It's all about Germany. It's always about Germany. So it was Russians and French together in the 19th century because of their fear of Germany. And in many ways, it's the same thing still today.
Yeah, Tom, I mean, Gwydian's position, they're quite similar to mine, actually. And I would, also add that the EU never misses, an opportunity and disaster to try and extend its power. But, I mean, are you as cynical as I am when it comes to this? Or like most people out there, they're cheering this move?
Well, I think that I would be amazed if it ever happened, is the first thing. I think you can kind of dangle this in front of the Ukrainians. It feels like the European Union, which has been very kind of flat-footed in general in response to this particular crisis, as well as the constituent member states, the most powerful ones being France and Germany. You just dangle this thing which will probably never happen, and therefore it feels like they can, again, wear the Ukrainian colours, they can show support, they can show solidarity, without really having to give anything up. I mean, it's a virtue signal, really, is what I think it is. And also, there is that kind of underlying contradiction, which you have a nation fighting for its sovereignty. Would it easily sit into a union which, as we all know, exists to limit national sovereignty? So it's an unlikely marriage in any case. I think it's largely about sending a signal and virtue signalling rather than anything substantial. And I think it underlines, as you were saying, a lot of the deficiencies and the weakness of the main kind of powers in Europe in relation to this conflict. They can do this, but it's because they've done very little in other respects.
But there's a crucial thing to underline here. Look, you know this better than most because you've been in the belly of the beast. The European Union is in a state of rapid disintegration, structural disintegration. It's been missing in action during the whole of this war, really. And the situation now of trying to hoik in the Ukrainians in some way like this is, as always with the EU, in my view, because I am very cynical, having watched it for 30, 40 years now, it is always about itself. It's about engrenage. It's not about the Ukrainians.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And, the hypocrisy of seeing Ursula von der Leyen there dressed in the Ukrainian colours when she, of course, was the defence minister of Germany at the same time that German weapon parts were being sold to Russia.
And when they had
despite
broomsticks.
sanctions against them after the...
I mean, at least have a knob, Kerry. The German forces had broomsticks.
Indeed. Gwydian, lovely having you back in the studio. Always love catching up, Tom. Thank you for your comments as well. I want to know your views. Surprised to hear that. Do you think Ukraine should join the EU? Do you think it's a load of virtue signalling? GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet the programme at GBNews. Now, I have no doubt we're an overdrugged nation with humans, the units of profit for big pharmaceutical companies flogging their wares. For them, our sickness is their gain. But what about when their drugs are making us ill? 1/5 of hospital admissions in the elderly are due to dangerous drug side effects. Doctors are all too often, perhaps unwittingly, prescribing pills based on what some believe to be biased and commercially corrupted information, with benefits overstated and harms downplayed. Well, today, England's top doctor has said stopping the overprescribing of drugs is more important than ever, and GPs should not dish out a pill for every ill, while more than 8 million Brits are on a cocktail of 5 or more drugs every day. Drugs such as statins and sleeping pills that would frankly not be necessary if people learned how to clean up their lifestyles. Well, let's talk to the chairman of the College of Medicine, Michael Dixon, now. Michael, what's your response to this call today? Do you think we are a nation basically being prescribed way too many drugs? Have we got a problem?
Well, yes, I do, and I totally agree with the chief pharmacist who said that. We've had a doubling of drugs in the last 10 years in primary care alone. Why is that necessary? Why have we got so many people, in fact, almost 25% of the population, on drugs that create dependency? Remember also that 25% of the carbon footprint of the NHS is drugs. So this is not only about spending too much money on drugs that cause problems with all those admissions you mentioned, Alex, going to hospital. It's also about our carbon footprint. It's also about, and you intimated this earlier, it's about getting people to look after their own health, enabling them to be healthy without using those drugs in the first place. And that really should be our priority. And what we're saying in the college is let's bring in social prescribing, which enables people, motivates them, and gives them access to all sorts of things that will make them healthier without the drugs.
I mean, what is going on there? Is there something far more cynical at work where doctors are prescribing drugs, perhaps without due care and due diligence, perhaps because they think it's the easy route, perhaps because patients demand it? Or is it just the case that we've become fatter and sicker because our lifestyles have changed? We're eating more junk food, we're not moving around as much?
Well, yes, it is almost a plot, isn't it, between clinicians and patients to go for a pill for every ill rather than actually sort the fundamental problem. It's not helped by the fact that we have, even our the National Clinical Excellence who give us advice as to what we should give, NICE, are saying that if we, for instance, have a patient that's 10% likely to get a heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years, then we should give them something either for blood pressure or cholesterol or whatever. Now, if you're a positive person, you might say, well, that means you've got a 90% chance of not having a heart attack or stroke in the next 10 years. And also, we should be looking much more, first of all, at what might prevent them getting into that level of risk, what they can do for their weight, their exercise, their lifestyle, etc. And that means giving our doctors and our surgeries time to have those conversations, not limiting them to 10 minutes, not having an ever spiraling decrease in GPs and people able to do this. And I think enabling people like myself, a family doctor, to have a real hold on what the community health looks like and helping people to be healthy in the first place and not get to a stage where they need the pills.
Michael, I really am thankful for your thoughtful comments on this, and it pleases me actually that there seems to be a change in the direction of travel following that announcement today. So thanks for coming on the programme, much appreciated. Michael Dixon, who's the chairman of the College of Medicine. Well, let's now talk to my studio guest, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked. Tom, there's been a big discussion in countries like America for a long time about the cynicism of the pharmaceutical industry, whereas here in the UK, I don't really think that debate's being had. Every now and then a headline about statins. But when you look at the stats and look at how many statins are being prescribed just like that, and sleeping tablets, when actually if people were told things like lose weight, exercise more, a lot of these problems are solved. Do you think that there's sort of, corporate dastardliness going on with big pharma that we need to be alive to?
Well, potentially we should always be concerned about, any kind of powerful corporation lobby group being able to exert any kind of influence on a market sensitive as something like healthcare. But I think, and a lot of your conversation there pointed to the structural problems with the health service itself. You have a situation in which it's very difficult to see a GP, and when you do, it's a very brief interaction. Then naturally everything becomes about just what we can give you for now, or what we can give you as a kind of palliative right now, rather than something more suited to sorting yourself out in the longer term, not in a hectoring nanny state way, not saying, you've got to lose weight or else, but just allowing to know your patients well enough to be able to do that. And it seems that that's just impossible in the moment and been made so much worse by the pandemic, and so many places in terms of their health provision have not recovered from that at all yet. So that seems to me to be the core of the issue with a lot of this, which is we'll just give you this because you can be on your way and you can be a bit happier about it without giving that longer term, more thoughtful care that they should do, I guess.
Tom, thank you. Well, you've been sending your emails in throughout the show today about the hot weather. And David says there is no consideration for elderly people who, by and large, hate such high temperatures. I'm 75 and looking forward to cooler temperatures next week. Simon says, here in Cumbria, it's cloudy and cool, 17.5 degrees. Been a poor spring so far. I'm sorry. Come down south. Susan says, Alex, if the heat is too much for you, come to Carmarthenshire in Wales. We've all just come in as it's windy and cold. I used to live in Wales, and 5 days out of 7, I was wearing my cagoule. Donald says it's very important to look after animals in this heat. Please make sure you give them water all day long. Good advice there. Well, yes, here I am, broadcasting from the dungeon of news in studio so air-conditioned I thought I had entered the Arctic tundra. And how typical is it, as I had laid out my plans to whisk Mr. Alex off to the coast this weekend, that, like clockwork, the clouds are rolling in every time. And I know this as a keen camper. My tent has become an agronomist's dream, caked with so many mud samples from around Blighty, as the inevitable weekend rain ruins my carefully laid plans for GB News Emancipation Days every time. I'm starting to be convinced that weekends were invented for work when some clever climate auditor noticed the weather became abysmal every 2 days out of 7. And in fact, we're all living a giant con. What are the 72 other genders I hear you all cry on a daily basis? Well, I decided to look it up. There's apagender, which apparently is someone apathetic towards gender. Surely a contradiction in terms if you've had to invent a word for it. Boy flux, someone with varying degrees of manliness, from Jason Momoa one day to Liberace the next. Mirror gender, someone who just copies the gender of whoever they happen to be with. And Alexi gender, which sadly isn't someone who identifies as yours truly, but doesn't actually have words to describe it. Yeah, definitely not like me. Well, if all of that sounds like self-indulgent claptrap, you may be relieved to hear that NHS Scotland is only adding one new gender to their list, and that is eunuchs. Yeah, eunuchs. The very organisation supposed to protect health are seemingly condoning a practice where nuts men chop off theirs. One apparently famous example of a voluntary eunuch is an asexual Japanese artist who lopped off his bits to serve at a banquet, because that's a totally normal thing to do in 2022. Now, just as it's revealed the EU is giving more money to Russia for Putin power than it did before the invasion of Ukraine, leaders Macron, Scholz and Draghi went on a little away day to Kiev in an act of unity. Oh, the gurning group toured shelled districts to the convenient backdrop of air raid sirens, with modern Napoleon beaming as he read graffiti saying, "Make Europe, not war," mere moments after suggesting Zelensky should just give Putin swathes of land to shut him up. It's taken months for the trio of charlatans to set foot in the very country they'd sell up the river, as they now push the EU to let Ukraine in. The patently cynical, self-aggrandising, opportunistic smarm of these characters should be warning enough to Kiev about the faux friends they're about to make in Brussels. Well, let's talk now to my studio guest, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked. We've already covered Ukraine and the EU, so let's have a little look at the genders and the eunuchs decision. I mean, that's worrying, isn't it?
It's so weird. I mean, it feels like anything in this whole kind of area just suddenly becomes progressive, even the most horrendous things. But, you know, there's so much in the whole sort of trans discussion at the moment, which is basically condoning the unacceptable. You know, you think about the cases of breast binding you've seen at certain girls' private schools, which has been given a green light to, and ultimately just giving young kids treatment that they really shouldn't. You know, some things that are really life-changing, even things like, you know, puberty blockers are potentially very life-changing, yet we're just giving those to children. It just seems on this particular issue where genuflecting to the ideology and trying to appear nice can even come against condoning, or in some cases actually facilitating, actual harm to people.
Self-mutilation.
That's where we're at with this discussion.
It is indeed. Tom, thank you so much, Tom Slater. Lovely having you as my guest today. That's all I've got time for. I'm going out to enjoy the sunshine. Join me again for We Need to Talk About, same time, same place, 2 o'clock on GB News from next week. Have a wonderful weekend from me. Next, it's the briefing with Dame Arlene Foster. First, though, time for the weather forecast. Bye-bye.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Today is all about the heat in the south, but it's not hot and sunny everywhere. We have cloud and rain across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland this morning from this weather front. But this area of high pressure has been dominating of late. It's edging its way eastwards, which is allowing even hotter air to arrive across parts of England and Wales. That's why temperatures will peak today in the low 30s. But that weather front further north is making for a damp start. The rain should ebb away, actually, from much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, turning brighter here, but we will see some of that rain pushing into parts of northern England, clouding over a little bit across Lancashire for sure. But further south and east, most of England and Wales dry, hot and sunny. 33, 34 in the London area up towards East Anglia. It will be cooler elsewhere, certainly some coasts will be cooler, but many places well above average. Much cooler air though for Scotland and Northern Ireland behind this weather front, which will continue to dribble southwards overnight, providing a little bit of rain for a time over northern England